There are moments in life when a person looks around and realizes they have been living but not truly existing. The days pass, the routines repeat. And somewhere beneath the noise of ordinary life, a quiet voice asks a question most people are afraid to answer. Why am I here? My purpose is not always loud. It does not always arrive as a grand revelation or a sudden flash of light. Sometimes it finds you slowly, the way dawn finds the ocean, quietly, patiently, without announcement. This is the story of a man who stood at the edge of the world every night, tending a flame that others depended on yet could not find, the light within himself. In a small coastal town, where the sea spoke in whispers and the fog rolled in like memory, there lived a lighthouse keeper named Elias. The lighthouse had stood on the edge of Calm Haven for over 100 years, through storms that bent the tallest trees and winters that turned the harbor silver with ice. It had never once gone dark. The people of the town had grown so accustomed to its steady beams sweeping across the night sky that they rarely looked up at it anymore. It was simply there, the way the tide was there, the way morning was there, reliable, unchanging, easy to forget. Elias. Van had kept that light burning for 23 years. He was a tall man, lean from a life of stairs and salt wind, with hands that knew every bolt and lever in that tower the way a musician knows the notes of a song played 1,000 times. The townspeople respected him. Children pointed at the lighthouse and said his name with a kind of reverence. Fishermen trusted the beam he lit each evening with their very lives. From the outside, Elias was a man of purpose. But on the inside, in the quiet hours between dusk and dawn, when only the sea kept him company, Elias felt something he could never quite name. A hollowness, a distance, though he were watching his own life through a foggy window. Going through the motions of a role he had memorized long ago, but no longer truly felt. He wound the mechanism. He polished the lens. Recorded wind speed and tide levels in a logbook with neat, careful handwriting. Every night, every season, without fail. But somewhere along the years, the meaning had drained out of it the way color drains from a painting left. Too long in the sun, he no longer asked himself why he was here. He had stopped believing the answer mattered. And that, perhaps, was the saddest kind of darkness. Not the kind that surrounds you, but the kind that quietly settles inside. He had not always been this way. There was a time not so long ago, memory served honestly, when Elias Van climbed those lighthouse stairs the way a young man runs toward something he loves. With urgency, with joy, with the breathless certainty that what he was doing mattered more than anything else in the world. He had come to Calm Haven at 26, fresh from a life that had felt directionless and loud. The city he left behind was full of movement, but empty of meaning, people rushing toward things they could not name, collecting days like loose change with nothing to spend them on. Elias had grown tired of that emptiness long before he admitted it, when the position of lighthouse keeper was offered to him through a distant relative. Most people in his life laughed. You want to live alone on a cliff and turn on a light every night. But Elias felt something shift in his chest the moment he first saw the tower, tall and white against the gray coastal sky. Patient and purposeful in a way that nothing in his previous life had ever been. He said yes before he had even finished reading the letter. Those early years were the fullest of his life. He learned the tides like a language. He memorized the names of every fishing vessel that passed his beam, kept extra logbooks just to write down the things he noticed, the color of the sky before a storm, the way seabirds behaved when the pressure changed, the particular silence that fell over the water just before dawn. He wrote to his mother once, "I think I finally understand what it feels like to be exactly where you are supposed to be." She kept that letter until she died. The light he tended was not just a navigation tool to Elias. It was a promise. Every evening when he struck the flame, he whispered the same thought like a quiet prayer. Someone out there needs this. I am here. That belief was everything. For a while it was enough. It happened on a November night, the kind the sea seems to reserve for its cruelest lessons. The storm had been building for 2 days. Elias had watched it gather on the horizon the way a man watches a bruise form slowly. inevitably with a dread that sits low in the stomach. He had logged the wind readings. He had lit the lamp earlier than usual. He had done everything right, everything he had always done, everything the years had taught him, and still, the Mara's Grace did not make it home. She was a mid-sized fishing vessel, captained by a man named Doran, a quiet, broad-shouldered father of 3 who had navigated these waters for decades. The crew was 7 men. They had left port 2 days before the storm turned serious, expecting to return well ahead of it. They did not. Elias was at his post when it happened. He never left his post. The light was burning, steady, bright, exactly as it should have been. But somewhere in that howling darkness, between the waves that rose like walls and the wind that swallowed every sound, the Mara's Grace struck the rocks south of the cove. 3 men survived, 4 did not. The town grieved in the way small towns grieve slowly, collectively, with a pain that settles into the streets and stays for years. There were no accusations. Harbor Master's report was clear. The storm had been exceptional. No lighthouse keeper could have done more, but logic has never once healed a grieving heart. Elias stood at the back of the memorial service and could not lift his eyes from the floor. Kept returning to the same unanswerable question, turning it over and over like a stone in his hands. Was the light bright enough? Could I have done more? Why wasn't it enough? No one blamed him. That was almost worse, because the voice that blamed him most was the one that lived inside his own chest, quiet, relentless, and impossible to extinguish. The flame in the tower still burned every night, but something in Elias had gone dark. Grief, when left unspoken, has a way of becoming furniture. It settles into the corners of a life, takes up space so gradually that one day you stop noticing it is there and begin mistaking it for simply the way things are. That was what happened to Elias in the years that followed the wreck of the Mara's Grace. He did not collapse. It did not stop working. From the outside, nothing had changed. The light still burned, the logbook still filled, the lens still gleamed. But inside, Elias had quietly closed every door. He stopped attending the Sunday gatherings at the harbor. He returned polite greetings with shorter and shorter replies until people learned not to linger. He ate alone, walked alone, and spent his evenings sitting by the tower window, not watching the sea with wonder, as he once had, but watching it with something closer to accusation. The worst part was the replaying every stormy night and on the coast. There were many. Elias returned involuntarily to that November. He would lie in the narrow bed in the keeper's quarters and reconstruct every hour of that evening with obsessive precision. The wind readings, the timing of the lamp, the angle of the beam. Each time he searched for the mistake he must have made it. Each time he found nothing, and somehow that made it worse. Because if there was no mistake, then the world was simply cruel. And that was a truth Elias was not prepared to carry. So instead, he carried guilt. It was heavier, but at least it gave him something to hold. He told himself he preferred solitude. He told himself the work was enough. He built a quiet, orderly, carefully controlled life and called it peace, not realizing that true peace does not need walls around it. He was not living inside his purpose anymore. He was hiding behind it. And the saddest thing was this: Elias no longer remembered what it felt like to tend the light and feel something. He had confused survival with meaning, and the years kept passing, as years always do, indifferent and unhurried. The boy appeared on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Elias first noticed him standing at the base of the lighthouse, neck craned back, staring up at the tower with the kind of unguarded wonder that only children and dreamers still allow themselves. He was perhaps 9 or 10 years old, small for his age. With wind-burned cheeks and eyes the color of shallow seawater, Elias opened the door with the intention of sending him away. "Cannot be here," he said. "This is not a place for children." Boy looked at him without fear. "Is it a place for you?" he asked. Elias had no answer for that. His name was Theo. His father was a fisherman who worked the early morning hours. and Theo had discovered the path up to the lighthouse while wandering the cliffs after school. He returned the next day, the day after that, with the quiet persistence of someone who has decided, without explanation, that a place matters. Elias tried ignoring him. It did not work. Eventually, reluctantly, the way a rusted door eventually gives, he let the boy inside. Theo asked questions the way children do, without ceremony or caution. Wanted to know how the lens worked, how far the light could reach, whether Elias had ever seen a shipwreck. And then, on the fourth visit, sitting on the iron steps halfway up the tower, Theo asked the question that cracked something open in Elias's chest. "Do you think the sailors feel safer?" The boy said quietly, "Just knowing the light is there? Even if they never see you?" Elias looked at him for a long moment. "I used to think so," he said finally. Theo nodded, as though this were a perfectly reasonable answer. Then he said, simply and without drama, "I feel safer knowing you're here." It was 9 words. 9 words spoken by a child who had no idea. He was handing a drowning man a rope. Something shifted in Elias after that afternoon. Not suddenly, not dramatically, the way seasons change. Not in a single moment, but in 1,000. Small ones. A morning where the air smells different. The light that lingers a little longer. A quiet rearrangement of the world that you only recognize in hindsight. He began allowing Theo to visit without resistance. At first, it was simply company, something Elias told himself he was tolerating rather than welcoming. But slowly, without quite realizing it, he began preparing for the boys' visits. He would set out 2 cups instead of 1. He found himself noting things during the week, a strange cloud formation, an usually colored tide with the quiet intention of sharing them. He was, without naming it, beginning to care again. Theo never pushed, never pried into the grief Elias carried, or asked about the shipwreck that had hollowed him out. He simply showed up, curious and unhurried, and treated the lighthouse as a place of wonder rather than a place of ghosts. And gradually, almost against his will, Elias began to see it that way too. One evening, as he prepared to light the lamp, Elias paused with the match in his hand. He stood very still and let himself feel what he was about to do, not as routine, it's not his duty, but as something real. Somewhere out on that dark water, there were people moving through uncertainty and shadow. And this light, his light, was a fixed point in their world. A promise kept every single night, regardless of weather, regardless of pain, regardless of everything. He struck the match. And for the first time in years, his hands did not feel mechanical. They felt like his own. That night, he opened the old logbook, not the official one, but the personal one he had abandoned a decade ago, and wrote a single line. "I think I forgot who I was doing this for." He closed it gently and looked out at the sea with something that felt, cautiously and quietly, like peace. Spring moved into summer, and Elias moved with it. Not with the restless energy of someone trying to outrun their past, but with the calm, deliberate motion of a man who has finally decided to inhabit his own life. The change was not announced. It did not arrive with fanfare or declaration. It simply settled into his days the way the returning light settles into a room that has been dark too long. Gently, gradually, and with extraordinary warmth, he began. Walking into town again at first, townspeople were surprised, offering careful smiles and cautious greetings. The way you approach something fragile. But Elias met them with an openness he had long forgotten he possessed. He learned the names of children who had been born during his years of withdrawal, shared tea with the harbor master on slow afternoons. He attended the memorial for the mayor's grace for the first time since the year had happened, and stood, not at the back this time, but among the people, his head lifted. He wept quietly. It felt lighter for it. With Theo, he became something he had never expected to be: a teacher. He showed the boy how to read the tides, how to identify weather patterns in the shape of clouds, how to maintain the lens with steady and patient hands. Theo absorbed everything with that same wide, unguarded wonder, and Elias found that in teaching, he was also rediscovering the love that had first drawn him to this life. One evening, as the two of them stood together at the top of the tower watching the beams sweep its long arc across the darkening water, Theo said, "I want to do this someday. Keep the light." Elias placed a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. "And you already understand the most important part," he said. "What's that?" Elias looked out at the sea, at the vast, patient, eternal sea that had taken and given so much. "That the light is not for you," he said softly. "It is for everyone who is lost out there. That is exactly why it fills you." Theo was quiet, the way people nod when something true lands in them. And the light swept on, steady, purposeful, and unafraid. And so ends the story of Elias Van, the lighthouse keeper who tended a flame for the world while forgetting to tend the one within himself. But perhaps it is also your story, showing up every day while somewhere inside, a quiet voice has been asking whether any of it still means something. If so, then let these lessons be your light tonight. First, purpose is not always loud. It does not always feel like inspiration. Sometimes it simply feels like showing up again and again, till the meaning finds its way back to you. Second, guilt is not loyalty. Carrying blame for what you could not control does not honor those you lost, only dims the light you still have left to give. Third, healing rarely arrives as a single moment. A match struck with intention, small, quiet, unhurried. Fourth, isolation is not strength. Withdrawing from the world to protect yourself from pain only deepens it. Connection is not a weakness. It is the very thing that reminds you who you are. Fifth, you do not need to understand your purpose fully to live it faithfully. Elias did not know he was saving Theo simply by being present. Your consistency matters more than you know. Sixth, the light you carry is not for you alone. When you live with intention and quiet courage, you become a fixed point in someone else's darkness, whether you ever know it or not. So tend your light, even on the nights you cannot see the shore, even when the storm is loud and the fog is thick, and you wonder if any of it matters. It matters. You matter. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs a light tonight. And if you are new here, welcome. There are more stories waiting.